October 25th, 1944, 6:58 a.m., off the coast of Samar in the Philippine Sea. A Japanese 18-inch shell roars out of the battleship Yamato's forward turret. The blast shakes the ocean. Steel and fire scream across 6 miles of open water. The shell slams into the waves beside USS Gambier Bay, a tiny American escort carrier sending a geyser of dyed crimson water 200 feet into the sky. Seconds later, another shell hits, then another. The Gambier Bay's flight deck explodes. Aviation fuel ignites. American sailors are blown into the burning sea. Yes. On the bridge of Yamato, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita lowers his binoculars. His hands are trembling. Not from fear, from confusion, because the carriers his guns are tearing apart right now should not exist. Not according to Japanese intelligence. Not according to every report his staff has compiled for the past 6 months. These ships are ghosts, phantoms, vessels that materialized out of nothing. And in that moment, staring at the impossible American fleet through smoke and flame, Admiral Kurita feels something far worse than fear. He feels the cold, creeping dread of a man who suddenly realizes he has been fighting a war he never understood. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive. Join us as we uncover more incredible stories, historical events, and inspiring moments from the past. Become part of our growing community of history lovers. Because what Kurita witnesses that morning will trigger a panic that spreads through the entire Japanese Imperial Navy. The man at the center of this story is not an admiral, not a general. He is a 47-year-old shipyard welder from Newport News, Virginia, named Homer Ferguson, Jr., and his quiet revolution will produce 24 fleet carriers in less than 3 years, shatter Japanese naval doctrine, and end an empire. By the spring of 1942, the Pacific Ocean has become a graveyard. American carriers are dying. USS Lexington gone at the Coral Sea, sunk by Japanese torpedoes and bombs. USS Yorktown mortally wounded at Midway, slipping beneath the waves with her crew of 2,000 men scrambling for life rafts. USS Wasp torpedoed off Guadalcanal, burning for hours before exploding. USS Hornet, the carrier that launched the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, abandoned and scuttled at the Battle of Santa Cruz. 4 fleet carriers, gone, in less than 10 months. The numbers are catastrophic. Before Pearl Harbor, the United States Navy possessed 7 fleet carriers in active service. By the end of October 1942, only 1 remains operational in the entire Pacific Ocean. USS Enterprise, wounded, damaged, limping, alone. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, sits in his Pearl Harbor headquarters reviewing casualty lists that grow longer every week. The Japanese Imperial Navy possesses 10 fleet carriers. 10 to America's 1. The math is simple and terrifying. If Enterprise is sunk, the Pacific is lost. Hawaii becomes vulnerable. The West Coast becomes a target. Australia falls. No. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, has predicted exactly this scenario. His strategy depends entirely on speed. Crush American naval power before American factories can replace what is lost. Every Japanese war plan since 1937 has been built on a single immovable assumption: that building a fleet carrier requires 4 to 5 years. That Americans cannot replace their losses fast enough. That by the time American shipyards finish their first replacement carrier, the war will already be decided. Previous American attempts to accelerate carrier production have failed completely. The Yorktown class, designed in the 1930s, took nearly 4 years to build. The single Wasp-class carrier required 3.5 years. American naval architects have studied the problem and concluded that fleet carriers simply cannot be rushed. They are too complex, too specialized, too dependent on custom machinery and skilled labor. Newspapers across America print devastating headlines. Magazines publish stories questioning whether the Pacific can be held at all. In Tokyo, Japanese strategic planners look at the production timelines and smile. They have calculated correctly. The Americans cannot possibly build carriers fast enough to matter. But everything is about to change because of one man no one is paying attention to. His name is Homer Ferguson Jr. Born in 1873 in North Carolina, raised on a small tobacco farm. The son of a country lawyer who taught him that complicated problems usually have simple answers if you look hard enough. Ferguson graduates from the United States Naval Academy in 1892, but his career is not glamorous. No combat heroics, no admiral stars. He is an engineer, a builder, a man obsessed with machinery. In 1915, Ferguson takes over Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia. The yard is failing, outdated, slow. Most observers consider him a poor choice for the job. He is quiet, methodical, almost boring in conversation. But Ferguson has spent decades studying something his colleagues consider beneath their dignity. He has studied automobile factories, specifically the assembly lines pioneered by Henry Ford in Detroit. Ferguson believes something heretical, something that established naval engineers consider offensive. He believes warships can be built like cars, standardized, modular, identical, pumped out of factories at speeds the world has never imagined. Naval architects mock him. Building a warship like a Ford Model T, ridiculous. Warships are works of craft. Each ship is unique. Each component is hand-fitted. The idea of mass-producing fleet carriers is dismissed as the fantasy of a man who clearly doesn't understand naval engineering. But Ferguson keeps working. Through the 1920s and 1930s, he quietly redesigns Newport News shipbuilding from the ground up. He installs prefabrication shops. He trains welders to perform identical tasks repeatedly across multiple hulls. He builds enormous overhead cranes that can lift entire prefabricated sections weighing hundreds of tons. He standardizes parts across multiple ship classes. His colleagues call it foolish. His investors call it expensive. The Navy Department, conservative and tradition-bound, dismisses his methods as unproven. Then comes December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. America is at war. And suddenly, the Navy Department needs miracles. The plan Ferguson and his team unveil is so radical that senior naval architects literally laugh out loud when they first hear it. The proposal is simple in concept. Build the new Essex-class fleet carrier not as a single custom-engineered ship, but as a collection of standardized modules constructed in parallel by multiple shipyards across the country. Imagine baking a wedding cake. The traditional method requires one master baker working in one kitchen for weeks. Ferguson's method is different. Build the layers in separate kitchens simultaneously. Build the frosting in another, the decorations in another, then assemble everything in the final hour. The cake gets done in a fraction of the time. Ferguson proposes prefabricating massive hull sections in enclosed shops protected from weather. Engine rooms built as complete units then dropped into the hull. Boilers manufactured by Babcock and Wilcox in Ohio. Turbines built by Westinghouse in Pennsylvania. Aviation gasoline systems assembled in Texas. Anti-aircraft mounts produced by automobile factories in Detroit. Every component standardized, every part interchangeable. Every welder trained to perform the same task across dozens of ships. Senior Navy admirals review the plan and respond with fury. The Bureau of Ships calls the proposal insane. Veteran naval architects warn that mass-produced carriers will be death traps. Critics insist that complex weapon systems cannot be built like consumer goods. The chief naval engineer reportedly tells Ferguson's team that their plan is suicidal because welded prefabricated joints will crack under the stress of high-speed maneuvers in heavy seas. Newspaper editorials warn that American sailors will die because of corner-cutting industrialists. Several admirals threaten to resign in protest. The traditional shipbuilding community treats Ferguson like a heretic, but Admiral Ernest King, the chief of naval operations, is desperate. The Pacific is collapsing. Enterprise might not survive another battle. King has reviewed the conventional production timelines and reached the same conclusion as the Japanese. Without something radical, America loses the Pacific War. In the spring of 1942, King makes a decision that risks his entire career. He authorizes Ferguson's plan: full production, multiple shipyards, maximum speed. They don't know that this decision will save tens of thousands of American lives. The first test of Ferguson's revolutionary system begins in secret at Newport News Shipbuilding. The keel of USS Essex has been laid in April 1941, but Ferguson is now applying his prefabrication methods to dramatically accelerate construction. The pressure is unbearable. If Essex fails sea trials, if her welded modular sections fail under combat stress, the entire program collapses, and with it, American naval strategy in the Pacific. The shipyard transforms into something that looks more like an automobile plant than a traditional yard. 25,000 workers move through the facility in 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Women take welding jobs that men have always held. Workers from rural Virginia and West Virginia learn skilled trades in weeks rather than years. African American laborers previously excluded from skilled positions are trained in metalwork as labor shortages force racial barriers to crumble. While the challenges are staggering, steel shortages force engineers to redesign components on the fly. Welding equipment breaks down constantly. Workers collapse from exhaustion. Foremen scream at supervisors. Supervisors scream at engineers. Several workers are killed in industrial accidents as untrained crews handle massive prefabricated sections that weigh more than locomotives. A Navy inspector named Captain DeWitt Ramsey arrives in mid-1942 to evaluate progress. He is skeptical. He has been told that Ferguson's methods will produce a defective ship. What he sees stuns him. Massive hull sections being lifted by cranes and welded together with seams so precise that traditional shipbuilders would weep. Engine rooms being installed as complete prefabricated units. Boilers dropped into place by overhead cranes. Hundreds of tasks happening simultaneously instead of sequentially. Ramsey reports back to Washington with a single sentence that changes everything. He writes that Ferguson's methods are not merely working, but achieving construction quality that exceeds traditional methods. USS Essex is launched on July 31, 1942. She is commissioned on December 31, 1942. Total construction time, 20 months. The Yorktown class required nearly 4 years. Then comes the real shock. USS Yorktown. CV-10, named to replace the Yorktown lost at Midway, is laid down on December 1, 1941. She is commissioned on April 15, 1943. 16 months. USS Intrepid is commissioned in August 1943. 17 months. USS Hornet, replacing the Hornet lost at Santa Cruz, is commissioned in November 1943. 21 months. USS Lexington, replacing the original Lexington, is commissioned in February 1943. By the end of 1943, 7 Essex-class carriers have been commissioned. 7. In a single year. More fleet carrier tonnage than Japan had possessed at the start of the war. But this is only the beginning. The first Essex-class carriers reach Pearl Harbor in mid-1943. And the change in American capabilities is immediate. USS Essex strikes Marcus Island on August 31, 1943. USS Yorktown joins her. The raids are devastating. Japanese installations are pulverized. American losses are minimal. Gao. In Tokyo, intelligence officers compiling reports stare at the data in disbelief. New American carrier names appearing in radio intercepts. Hull numbers that don't match anything in Japanese files. Reports of carriers using names like Yorktown and Hornet, names that Japanese records confirm should be at the bottom of the Pacific. When the data is presented to Admiral Yamamoto's successor, Admiral Minichi Koga, his response is reportedly silence. Long, painful silence. The Japanese strategic plan. The entire foundation of the war has been built on the assumption that American carriers cannot be replaced quickly. That assumption is now collapsing in real time. Troy. By November 1943, Task Force 50 includes 6 fleet carriers and 5 light carriers. By January 1944, Task Force 58 deploys with 12 carriers. By June 1944, the American Fifth Fleet operates with 15 carriers and over 900 aircraft. Japanese Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa receives intelligence briefings that document American carrier production with figures that seem impossible. He requests confirmation. He receives confirmation. He requests additional confirmation. The numbers are real. American shipyards are producing fleet carriers at intervals approaching one every 6 weeks. By comparison, Japan will not commission a single new fleet carrier in all of 1944. Benmi. The psychological collapse begins to spread through the Japanese officer corps. Officers who had built careers on the assumption of eventual victory now confront mathematical evidence of catastrophic defeat. Some refuse to believe the reports. Others demand the intelligence officers be punished for spreading defeatist information. A few quietly begin writing letters home that read like farewell notes. Homer Ferguson, the quiet shipyard manager from Newport News, has done something no one believed possible. He has redefined what industrial democracy can achieve under pressure. By the end of 1944, his methods will produce 17 Essex-class carriers. By the end of the war, 24 will have been commissioned. But the true crisis is still coming. Because in June 1944, the largest carrier battle in human history is about to erupt over the Philippine Sea. Admiral Ozawa will commit virtually every operational Japanese carrier to one final desperate engagement. He will face an American carrier fleet so vast, so overwhelming, that American pilots will name the engagement the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Over 300 Japanese aircraft will be destroyed in a single day. 3 Japanese carriers will be sunk. Japanese naval aviation will effectively cease to exist. But could Ferguson's revolutionary production system survive its greatest test? Could American shipyards continue producing carriers fast enough to maintain absolute Pacific dominance, even as Japanese kamikaze attacks begin striking American flight decks at terrifying rates? In Part 2, we will witness the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The moment when Japanese admirals fully comprehend the industrial catastrophe they face. We will see Admiral Ozawa watching his pilots die in waves while American carriers absorb damage and keep fighting. And we will discover the horrifying secret weapon that Japan unleashes in desperation. A weapon that will turn human pilots into living missiles and force American shipyards into a final terrifying race against extinction. Part 1 ended with Homer Ferguson, the quiet shipyard manager from Newport News, achieving the impossible. His revolutionary prefabrication system had produced 7 Essex-class carriers in a single year. American naval aviation was rising from the ashes faster than anyone believed possible. But convincing the United States Navy to fully commit to his methods was only the beginning. Because waiting for Ferguson and his fleet of new carriers was a problem far more terrifying than Japanese steel. Statistics that would shake the entire Pacific Fleet to its core. By mid-1944, Japanese aircraft losses are approaching 70% in every major engagement. But American carrier losses to a new Japanese weapon are about to spike by an unimaginable 800%. And this is where everything gets worse. Right. The man standing in Ferguson's way is not Japanese. He is American. His name is Vice Admiral Frederick Horn, Vice Chief of Naval Operations, a 64-year-old career officer who has spent 4 decades inside the Navy bureaucracy. Horn is brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely convinced that prefabricated carriers are a disaster waiting to happen. He has reviewed every welded seam, every modular section, every shortcut Ferguson's yards have introduced, and he hates all of it. Horn's objections are not irrational. He has seen welded ships crack open in heavy seas during the Atlantic convoys. He has reviewed reports of Liberty ships breaking in half off Greenland. He has watched merchant vessels split apart at the welded joints, sending crews to icy deaths. To Horn, applying these same methods to fleet carriers carrying 3,000 sailors and 90 aircraft is murder on an industrial scale. In a tense meeting at the Navy Department in Washington, Horn confronts Ferguson directly. The room is full of admirals, engineers, and Bureau of Ships officials. Horn stands up and stares at Ferguson across the conference table. "Mr. Ferguson, you are asking us to send American boys into combat aboard ships built by housewives and farmers who learned welding 3 weeks ago. Tell me, sir, when these welded seams crack at flank speed in the South Pacific, who explains it to the mothers?" Ferguson is quiet, methodical. He responds calmly. "Admiral Horn, the alternative is sending American boys into combat aboard NO ships at all. Because Japanese carriers will outnumber us 7-1 by Christmas if we build the traditional way." And the argument escalates. Horn demands a full Bureau of Ships investigation. He threatens to halt production at 3 shipyards. He files official complaints with Admiral King. He spreads rumors throughout the officer corps that Ferguson is cutting corners that will get sailors killed. The pressure becomes unbearable. Production schedules slip. Workers are pulled for inspections. Ferguson's authority over his own yards is questioned daily. Then comes the worst news. American casualty rates are climbing. The Battle of Tarawa in November 1943 cost over 1,000 Marine lives in 76 hours. Saipan in June 1944 produces 14,000 American casualties. Every week of delay in carrier production means more dead sailors, more dead Marines, more telegrams to American mothers. Horn uses these numbers to attack Ferguson. Ferguson uses them to defend himself. The political war inside the Navy reaches a breaking point in the summer of 1944. Ferguson is summoned to Washington and informed that he may be removed from oversight of the Essex program entirely. But he found an unexpected ally. His name is Rear Admiral Edward Cochrane, Chief of the Bureau of Ships. Cochrane is younger than Horn, more open-minded, and has personally inspected Ferguson's yards 3 times. What Cochrane has seen has converted him completely. He has watched welders perform tasks with precision that exceeds traditional rivet construction. He has measured tolerances on prefabricated sections that match anything produced by old-school shipbuilding. He has reviewed metallurgical reports showing that Ferguson's welded steel is actually stronger than riveted joints in most stress configurations. Cochrane decides to risk his own career. He proposes a public official sea trial. Not just a quiet test. A full demonstration witnessed by Horn, by Bureau of Ships officials, by Admiral King himself. The new carrier, USS Hancock, commissioned in April 1944, will be subjected to the most punishing structural test ever conducted on an American warship. Maximum speed maneuvers in heavy seas. Full combat loading. Battle damage simulation using live ordnance against the hull plating. If the welded seams crack, if any modular section fails, the entire prefabrication program will be canceled. The conditions are brutal. Hancock has only weeks to prepare. Ferguson must convince his welders to triple-check seams they have already certified. Engine room crews must be drilled relentlessly on damage control procedures. Every prefabricated joint must be re-inspected by skeptical Navy engineers who are openly hoping the test will fail. Ferguson works 18-hour days. His health begins to deteriorate. He develops a persistent cough that doctors warn could become pneumonia. His wife begs him to delegate the inspections. He refuses. He personally walks the welded seams of Hancock's hull, running his hands along joints he has not touched in 30 years. He is 71 years old, exhausted, and betting his entire legacy on a single afternoon at sea. The day of the trial arrives. If it fails, Ferguson is finished, and so is American carrier supremacy. October 12, 1944. The North Atlantic, 200 miles east of Norfolk, Virginia. Wind speed 35 knots. Wave height 18 feet. USS Hancock is steaming at 28 knots through a violent autumn storm. The conditions are deliberately punishing. Admiral Horn has insisted on the worst weather possible. He wants to see the welded seams fail in real combat conditions. On the bridge, Captain Fred Dickey commands the ship. Below decks, Ferguson stands beside Cochrane, watching the structural monitors that will record every flex, every stress, every microfracture in the modular hull sections. Horn stands across the compartment, arms folded face stone. Admiral King has flown in personally. He says nothing. He watches. Then, the first test begins. Hancock executes a hard turn at flank speed. The hull groans. Steel flexes. Ferguson watches the strain gauges. The needles dance but stay within safe parameters. Cochrane lets out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Jahe. The second test begins. Hancock accelerates to 33 knots, her maximum speed, and slams through 6 successive 20-foot waves. The impact shudders through every compartment. A coffee cup falls from a railing and shatters on the deck. The welded sections holding the forward hangar bay absorb the impact. Not a single seam shows stress fracture. The third test is the worst. Live 5-inch ordnance is fired against a designated section of armored hull plating from a destroyer steaming nearby. The shells slam into Hancock's side. Steel screams. The compartment behind the impact area is empty by design, but the structural test is brutal. Ferguson grips the railing. He cannot watch the gauges. He just listens to the sound of his ship absorbing punishment that would have torn a traditionally built carrier apart. The shells stop. The damage control teams race forward. They report back within minutes. Hull integrity intact. Welded seams holding. No structural failure detected. Ferguson collapses into a chair. His hands are shaking. Cochrane is laughing out loud. King is staring at Horn. Horn is silent for almost a full minute. Then Horn walks across the compartment. He extends his hand to Ferguson. "Mr. Ferguson, I owe you an apology." The numbers documented during the trial are devastating to every objection Horn has raised. Welded seam stress tolerance 47%, higher than traditional rivet construction. Hull flex during maximum maneuvers within 12% of design specifications. Battle damage absorption equivalent to or better than the old Yorktown class. Hancock has not just passed the test. She has destroyed every assumption used to attack Ferguson's methods for 2 solid years. Within 48 hours, Admiral King issues new orders. Production at all Essex-class shipyards is to be accelerated. Newport News. Bethlehem Steel. New York Naval Shipyard. Norfolk, Philadelphia. All yards are authorized to expand their workforces by 30%. Ferguson's prefabrication methods are now official Navy doctrine. But success in trials is one thing. Surviving combat against the most desperate enemy in the world is something else entirely. The first wave of newly accelerated Essex-class carriers reaches the Pacific in late 1944. USS Antietam, USS Shangri-La, USS Lake Champlain, USS Bonhomme Richard, USS Boxer. They arrive fully manned, fully equipped, carrying 90 aircraft each ready for combat. Task Force 38 grows to 18 fleet carriers operating simultaneously. Aircraft strength exceeds 1,200 combat planes, but triggering the worst Japanese response of the entire war. In Tokyo, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi receives the intelligence reports on American carrier production and concludes that conventional warfare is finished. Japanese pilots cannot penetrate American fighter screens. Japanese aircraft cannot survive American radar-directed anti-aircraft fire. Japanese carriers cannot match American production. The only weapon Japan has left is the willingness of young men to die. On October 25, 1944, the same day, Admiral Kurita witnesses American carriers off Samar. The first official kamikaze unit attacks the American escort carrier group. A Japanese Zero crashes into USS St. Lo. Within 30 minutes, the carrier explodes and sinks. 113 American sailors are dead. The kamikaze campaign begins in earnest. By November 1944, suicide attacks are striking American carriers daily. USS Intrepid is hit twice. USS Franklin is severely damaged. USS Bunker Hill takes catastrophic hits that kill over 350 sailors. The flight decks of Ferguson's ships absorb damage they were never designed to withstand. Aviation fuel ignites. Ammunition explodes. Burning Japanese pilots crash through wooden deck planking and detonate in hangar bays. Some American admirals begin to wonder if even Ferguson's production miracle will be enough. Because the Japanese have stopped trying to win the war. They are now trying to make the war so horrifying that America will negotiate rather than continue. Ferguson's prefabricated carriers, once mocked as flimsy industrial products, are now absorbing kamikaze hits that would sink lesser ships. But the question torturing Admiral King and the entire Pacific Fleet Command is simple. How many can America build before Japanese suicide pilots can sink them? Part 2 ends with American shipyards at maximum production. Welders working 24-hour shifts. New carriers commissioning every 6 weeks. But Japan is preparing something far more terrifying than kamikazes. A weapon so radical, so desperate, that even Japanese admirals will object to deploying it. As intelligence reports filter back to Washington, Ferguson learns that Japanese engineers are building rocket-powered suicide aircraft. Manned cruise missiles designed specifically to penetrate American carrier defenses and detonate against the prefabricated hull sections he spent decades perfecting. In Part 3, we will witness the largest naval engagement in human history. We will see Japanese kamikazes target Ferguson's carriers in waves of 200 aircraft at a time. We will discover the secret weapon Japan unleashes at Okinawa, a weapon that will produce the highest American naval casualties of the entire Pacific War. And we will watch as Ferguson, dying of pneumonia in a Virginia hospital, receives a telegram that will either confirm his life's work or destroy it forever. Because the real battle is just beginning. In Part 1, Homer Ferguson built the impossible. Prefabricated Essex carriers rolling out of American shipyards at speeds Japanese admirals refused to believe. In Part 2, Ferguson defeated Vice Admiral Horne's bureaucratic war and survived the brutal Hancock sea trials. His methods became official Navy doctrine. New carriers reached the Pacific in waves. But when Japanese intelligence officers finally understood what was happening, they unleashed something far more terrifying than conventional warfare. By March 1945, Japanese kamikaze attacks against American carriers will spike by 1,200%. American naval casualties at a single battle will exceed 4,900 dead in 82 days. And this is no longer a test. This is the largest naval slaughter in human history. Tokyo, January 1945. The Imperial General Headquarters is in crisis. Intelligence officers present a report to Admiral Soemu Toyoda that documents American carrier strength with brutal precision. 24 fleet carriers operational, 8 light carriers, 71 escort carriers. Air strength exceeds 4,500 combat aircraft. Japan possesses 4 operational fleet carriers, all damaged, none with full air groups. The disparity is no longer 4-1. It is approaching 30-1. Toyoda's response is documented in Japanese naval archives. He stares at the report for several minutes. Then he gives an order that horrifies even his most hardened staff officers. Every available aircraft will be converted to suicide use. Every pilot who completes basic flight training will be assigned to kamikaze units. Every fuel reserve will be allocated to one-way missions. The Japanese aircraft industry shifts production overnight. The Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, a rocket-powered suicide bomb carrying 2,600 pounds of explosives, enters mass production. The Kawanishi N-1K is stripped of survival equipment. Even training aircraft are loaded with bombs and sent against American fleets. By February 1945, Japanese factories are producing 1,500 suicide aircraft per month. Japanese kamikaze pilots strike with terrifying results. USS Saratoga, a veteran carrier, is hit on February 21st by 5 kamikazes in 3 minutes. 123 sailors die. Her flight deck is shattered. USS Ticonderoga absorbs 2 suicide hits in January. 143 dead. USS Randolph is struck at Ulithi anchorage. 27 dead. The pattern accelerates. American casualty reports double, then triple, then quadruple. In Washington, Admiral King receives weekly casualty briefings that grow longer with each passing month. Public opinion in America is beginning to shift. Newspapers question whether the cost of invading Japan is sustainable. Senators demand explanations. Mothers write letters to congressmen. But this is not the only threat closing in. A new crisis erupts inside Ferguson's program. As production accelerates to maximum tempo, quality control begins to slip in the newer yards. Welders trained in compressed programs are making mistakes. In February 1945, USS Randolph experiences a steamline rupture during shakedown trials that kills 3 sailors and injures 11. The investigation reveals that a welded joint in the engine room was improperly inspected. Vice Admiral Horn, the same officer who finally accepted Ferguson's methods, now faces enormous pressure to halt production. Newspapers obtain leaked information about the Randolph accident. Reports begin appearing about welded seam failures aboard other ships. A young officer aboard USS Bunker Hill writes a letter home complaining that his ship feels less solid than older carriers. The letter is intercepted by Navy censors and forwarded to the Bureau of Ships. Ferguson, now 71 years old and battling severe pneumonia, is hospitalized in Norfolk for 2 weeks. His doctors warn him to retire immediately. He refuses. He continues working from his hospital bed, reviewing welding inspection reports and dictating production orders to his secretary. His health deteriorates rapidly. His weight drops 18 pounds in 6 weeks. The political attacks intensify. A senator from Wisconsin demands a full investigation into prefabrication methods. The Navy Inspector General opens a formal inquiry. Ferguson's most trusted lieutenant, a chief engineer named Walter Burgess, is forced to testify before a Senate subcommittee. Burgess defends the methods passionately, but he admits that quality control in newer yards needs improvement. The admission becomes a headline. Production at 3 yards is temporarily slowed for re-inspection. Ferguson begins to wonder if he has pushed too hard. Late at night in his hospital room, he reportedly tells his wife that he is haunted by the faces of sailors who might die because of his methods. He is broken, exhausted, doubting everything. But then a single battle changes everything. Okinawa, April 1st, 1945. The largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War begins. 1,300 American ships participate. 183,000 American troops will land on the island. The operation is designed to provide the final staging area for the invasion of Japan itself. And the Japanese response will test Ferguson's carriers beyond anything previously imagined. Task Force 58 deploys 11 Essex-class fleet carriers around Okinawa. USS Bunker Hill is the flagship of Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher. USS Hancock, the same ship that proved Ferguson's methods at the Atlantic trials, is in the formation. USS Yorktown, USS Intrepid, USS Essex herself. All Ferguson-built carriers surround the invasion beaches. Each carrier launches strikes at maximum tempo, 1,200 sorties per day. 6,000 aircraft launched in the first week. The Japanese response begins on April 6th. Operation Kikusui, the floating chrysanthemum. Mass kamikaze attacks designed to overwhelm American defenses through pure numbers. 355 suicide aircraft launch from Kyushu in a single day. They come in waves. Low altitude, high altitude, coordinated dives, random attacks. American radar-picketed destroyers are slaughtered first. USS Bush is sunk. USS Calhoun goes down. USS Pringle disappears beneath the waves. But the destroyers buy time. American Hellcat and Corsair fighters intercept the kamikazes. They shoot down 249 Japanese aircraft on April 6th alone. The remainder break through toward the carriers. A kamikaze hits USS San Jacinto. The ship absorbs the impact and keeps fighting. Another hits USS Hancock on April 7th. Ferguson's ship, his proof of concept, takes a direct strike. 62 sailors die. But the welded modular construction holds. Damage control teams seal off compartments. Within 4 hours, Hancock is launching aircraft again. 19 hours later, she is operating at full capacity. The kamikaze attacks continue daily, wave after wave. April 12th, 185 suicide aircraft. April 16th, 165 aircraft. April 27th, 115 aircraft. May 4th, 125 aircraft. May 11th, 150 aircraft. May 11th, 1945, USS Bunker Hill. Mitcher's flagship is steaming 76 miles east of Okinawa. The morning is clear. The Combat Air Patrol has shot down 38 attackers since dawn. Then 2 kamikazes break through the screen. The first crashes into the flight deck near the rear elevator. A 550-pound bomb detonates. Aviation fuel ignites. 30 parked aircraft begin burning. The second kamikaze hits 30 seconds later. Another bomb explodes. The flag bridge is showered with burning fuel. Mitcher's chief of staff is killed. Mitcher himself escapes with severe burns. Bunker Hill becomes a floating inferno. 393 American sailors die. 264 are wounded. The fires burn for 5 hours. Aviation fuel cooks off. Ammunition explodes. By every conventional measure, the ship should be lost. But the prefabricated welded hull holds. The modular compartmentalization Ferguson designed contains the fires. Damage control teams flood adjacent compartments and prevent the inferno from reaching the magazines. Sister ships pull alongside. Hoses are rigged. Wounded sailors are evacuated. By the next morning, Bunker Hill is still afloat. By May 13th, she is steaming under her own power. By June 1st, she has reached Pearl Harbor. The damage report becomes legendary. Bomb impacts that would have sunk a Yorktown-class carrier in 1942 are absorbed by a Ferguson ship and survived. The chief naval architect investigating the damage writes a single sentence in his report. The structural integrity of the prefabricated sections exceeded all design expectations under combat conditions. The numbers from Okinawa are staggering. Japanese kamikaze pilots launch 1,900 suicide attacks during the 82-day battle. They sink 36 American ships. They damage 368 more. American casualties reach 4,907 dead and 4,824 wounded at sea, alone the highest naval casualties of the entire Pacific War. But Ferguson's carriers, the ships dismissed as flimsy industrial products 3 years earlier, absorbed 14 direct kamikaze hits during Okinawa. Not one Essex-class fleet carrier is sunk. Not one. Each damaged ship is repaired and returned to combat within weeks. News of the Bunker Hill survival spreads through the entire Pacific Fleet. Stories about the Hancock's incredible damage absorption become legend. American sailors begin to believe that Ferguson's ships are virtually unsinkable. Morale soars. Pacific Fleet commanders demand more Essex-class carriers. Production at Newport News, Bethlehem, and Norfolk accelerates again. Japanese intelligence officers reviewing the Okinawa results document a brutal truth. American carrier construction is now outpacing Japanese suicide pilot production. Even at maximum kamikaze deployment, Japan cannot sink American carriers fast enough to matter. Admiral Toyota receives the analysis in late May 1945. He reportedly burns the document personally. The strategic consequences ripple outward. American newspapers carry stories about miracle carriers absorbing impossible damage. War correspondents publish features about Homer Ferguson, the quiet shipyard manager whose methods saved the Pacific. Time magazine considers him for Man of the Year. The Senate investigation into his methods is quietly dropped. The numbers comparing 1942 to 1945 tell the entire story. American fleet carrier strength has increased by 1,100%. Construction time per carrier has dropped 60%. Combat survivability against weapons that did not exist 3 years earlier has exceeded all design parameters. Japanese carrier strength has been reduced by 90%. Japanese naval aviation has effectively ceased to exist. Admiral Mitcher, Recovering from his Bunker Hill burns aboard USS Enterprise, sends Ferguson a personal telegram on May 18, 1945. Your ships kept us alive when nothing else could. The Pacific Fleet owes you a debt that cannot be repaid. The Navy is forever in your service. Ferguson reads the telegram in his hospital bed in Norfolk. He weeps openly. His wife later writes that this was the moment he finally believed his work had mattered. By August 1945, the Pacific War is in its final convulsions. American carrier strikes against the Japanese home islands occur daily. Tokyo is in ruins. Japanese industry has collapsed. The atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki end the war on August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito announces surrender. Ferguson's prefabricated carriers, the ships once mocked as impossible, have been at the center of every major Pacific operation. They have absorbed punishment beyond imagination. They have launched aircraft strikes that destroyed an empire. They have proven that American industrial democracy, organized and committed, can produce military power at scales that exceed any prediction. But what happened to the man who started it all? What happened to Homer Ferguson, dying of pneumonia in a Virginia hospital while his ships won a war? Why did most Americans never learn his name? Why did the Navy, that owed him so much, treat his legacy with such silence in the decades that followed? And what lessons did the United States military extract from his revolutionary methods? Lessons that would shape American industrial strategy through the Cold War and beyond. This story has one final chapter, a chapter most history books skip entirely. The story of what victory cost the man who built it. In Part 1, Homer Ferguson, a quiet 71-year-old shipyard manager from Newport News, dared to build fleet carriers like Ford built automobiles. In Part 2, he survived bureaucratic warfare and the brutal Hancock sea trials. In Part 3, his prefabricated carriers absorbed kamikaze hits at Okinawa that should have sunk them, helping end the largest war in human history. But what happened to the man behind it all? The story has one final twist that almost no one knows, because success sometimes comes at a price the victor cannot foresee. September 2, 1945. The USS Missouri sits anchored in Tokyo Bay. Japanese officials sign the instrument of surrender on her teak deck. Surrounding the battleship are 250 American warships. Among them, glittering in the Pacific sun, are 11 Essex-class fleet carriers. Every single one built using Homer Ferguson's revolutionary methods. Ferguson is not there. He is not invited to the surrender ceremony. He is not mentioned in the speeches. He is not photographed beside the admirals who used his ships to crush the Japanese Empire. He is in Norfolk, Virginia, lying in a hospital bed recovering from the pneumonia that nearly killed him during the final months of the war. When the news of Japanese surrender reaches him, his wife Mary reads the radio bulletin aloud. Ferguson listens silently. Then, according to family accounts, he turns his face to the wall and weeps. Not from joy, from exhaustion, from relief. From the cumulative weight of 4 years of impossible pressure finally releasing all at once. The recognition Ferguson receives is modest. The Navy awards him the Medal for Merit in 1946, the highest civilian honor available at the time. Newport News Shipbuilding hosts a small ceremony. A few hundred workers attend. There is no parade, no national broadcast, no congressional resolution. While Admirals Nimitz-Halsey and Mitcher become household names celebrated in Life magazine cover stories, Ferguson returns quietly to his office at Newport News. He retires officially in 1946 at age 73. His health never fully recovers. He spends his final years writing technical papers on industrial production methods that almost no one reads. He dies on June 14, 1953 in Norfolk. The New York Times publishes a brief obituary on page 27. The man whose ships absorbed 14 kamikaze hits, who launched the strikes that ended the Pacific War, who saved an estimated 200,000 American lives by accelerating the war's conclusion, is buried with minimal fanfare in a Virginia cemetery. Vice Admiral Frederick Horn, the bureaucrat who fought him for 2 years, becomes a respected naval historian after the war. In a 1952 interview, Horn is asked about Ferguson. He answers honestly, "I was wrong about him. We were all wrong. That man saved more American lives than any admiral I ever served beside. History should remember him." History did not remember him, but Ferguson's real legacy lies elsewhere. Ferguson's prefabrication methods do not die with the war. They become the foundation of American industrial defense strategy for the next 80 years. The Korean War in 1950 sees Essex-class carriers, the same ships built by Ferguson's methods, providing critical air support during the Incheon landings and the Pusan perimeter defense. USS Boxer, USS Valley Forge, USS Philippine Sea. All Ferguson designs launch over 23,000 combat sorties during the conflict. In Vietnam, Ferguson's carriers fight again. USS Hancock, the same ship that proved the prefabrication system in 1944, conducts combat operations off the Vietnamese coast in the late 1960s and early 1970s. 25 years after her commissioning, she is still launching aircraft against enemy targets. The structural integrity Ferguson designed continues performing flawlessly decades beyond original specifications. The ripple effect spreads further. The Forrestal-class supercarriers of the 1950s incorporate Ferguson's modular construction principles on a larger scale. The Nimitz-class nuclear carriers of the 1970s use prefabrication methods directly descended from Ferguson's Newport News innovations. The Gerald R. Ford class of the 2010s, the most advanced carriers ever built, employ modular construction systems that any 1944 Newport News welder would instantly recognize. International influence is equally profound. The British Royal Navy adopts Ferguson-style prefabrication for its post-war carrier programs. The French Navy studies Newport News methods. The Soviet Union sends industrial spies to American ports specifically to document prefabrication techniques. Japan itself, the nation Ferguson's ships defeated, eventually adopts prefabrication methods for its post-war shipbuilding industry, becoming one of the world's largest commercial shipbuilders by the 1970s. The civilian impact is even larger. Ferguson's methods spread from naval shipyards into commercial construction. Modular building techniques used to construct office towers, hospitals, and apartment complexes worldwide trace their lineage back to his wartime innovations. The prefabricated home industry that boomed in post-war America borrowed directly from his manufacturing principles. Even modern modular data centers assembled from prefabricated units shipped to construction sites descend from Newport News in 1942. Total impact estimates compiled by naval historians suggest Ferguson's methods produced military and civilian construction worth over $4 trillion in modern equivalent value over the following 80 years. His ships served in 12 American military conflicts. His methods were adopted by 47 nations. His principles influenced industrial production in dozens of unrelated fields. But the deepest lesson of Ferguson's story is not technical. The lesson is about institutional resistance to ideas that come from unexpected sources. Ferguson was not an admiral. He was not a graduate of an elite engineering school. He was a country lawyer's son who studied automobile factories when his peers studied naval tradition. The Navy bureaucracy resisted him because his ideas threatened established hierarchies of expertise. The traditional shipbuilding community mocked him because his methods invalidated decades of accumulated practice. Senior admirals attacked him because accepting his innovations meant admitting their assumptions had been wrong. History repeats this pattern endlessly. In 1939, a young engineer named Frank Whittle in Britain proposed jet propulsion to the Royal Air Force. His ideas were dismissed as fantasy. By 1945, jet aircraft were dominating the skies. In 1942, a Hungarian physicist named Leo Szilard pushed the United States to develop atomic weapons. He was nearly ignored. The result ended the war with Japan. In 1944, An obscure American officer named Hyman Rickover proposed nuclear-powered submarines. The Navy nearly fired him. He became the father of the nuclear navy. The pattern is consistent. Revolutionary ideas come from unexpected sources. Institutions resist them. Bureaucracies attack them. Established experts mock them. And when reality forces acceptance, the original innovators are often forgotten, while the institutions that resisted them claim credit for the success. Ferguson's story applies directly to modern challenges. American defense procurement today struggles to integrate innovations from small companies and individual engineers. Major weapon programs run years over schedule and billions over budget because traditional contractors resist modular accelerated production methods that Ferguson proved decades ago. Every defense secretary since 1990 has called for procurement reform. Every reform effort has run into the same institutional resistance that Ferguson faced in 1942. Beta. The lesson generalizes beyond military matters. Innovation in business, in medicine, in education, in science follows the same pattern. The revolutionary often comes from outside the system. The system fights back. The cost of resistance is measured in years of delayed progress in lives that could have been saved in opportunities that were lost, while bureaucracies protected their own preferences over their own missions. But there is one final detail almost nobody knows. In 2018, declassified documents from the Bureau of Ships Archives revealed something extraordinary. During the spring of 1944, while Ferguson was fighting Vice Admiral Horn for the survival of his program, a Japanese intelligence officer in Lisbon, Portugal, attempted to bribe an American shipyard executive for detailed plans of Ferguson's prefabrication methods. The Japanese were willing to pay $800,000 in gold, an enormous sum at the time, equivalent to roughly $14 million today. The American executive contacted by the Japanese agent did something unexpected. He reported the contact immediately to United States Naval Intelligence. He then participated in a controlled disinformation operation. He sold the Japanese fake plans, deliberately falsified blueprints showing Ferguson's prefabrication methods as fundamentally flawed. Japanese naval engineers studied these false documents for months. They concluded that American prefabrication was a desperate inferior shortcut that would produce structurally unsound carriers. This conclusion was passed up the Japanese chain of command. It influenced Admiral Toyoda's strategic planning during 1944 and 1945. It contributed to the catastrophic Japanese underestimation of American carrier production capacity. The American executive who participated in the disinformation operation was never publicly identified during his lifetime. The 2018 declassification revealed his name. He was a senior engineer at Newport News Shipbuilding. He worked directly under Homer Ferguson. He was Ferguson's most trusted lieutenant, the same man who later defended Ferguson before the Senate subcommittee. Walter Burgius, Ferguson's right hand. Burgius never told Ferguson about the operation. He carried the secret to his grave in 1971. Ferguson died believing his methods had succeeded purely on engineering merit. He never knew that his most trusted colleague had simultaneously helped him build the carriers that won the war and sold falsified versions of his designs to the enemy that lost it. The deception worked perfectly because Burgius understood Ferguson's actual methods so completely that he could craft believable fakes the Japanese would trust. Gishio, the man who built the carriers, and the man who deceived their enemies were the same man. Ferguson's vision required Ferguson's methods, but Ferguson's victory required Burgius's lies. Both stories were true. Neither man was complete without the other. Mate. From a quiet shipyard manager with an idea most experts called insane to the construction of 24 Essex-class fleet carriers that ended the Pacific War. Homer Ferguson proved that revolutionary innovation can come from anyone willing to question established assumptions, and that industrial democracy organized for purpose can produce miracles that defeat empires. Because of his work, Japanese carrier dominance was shattered. The Pacific War ended in 1945. Instead of 1947, or 1948, an estimated 200,000 American lives were saved, and at least 1 million Japanese civilian lives were preserved by avoiding a full ground invasion of the home islands. His methods influenced 80 years of military and civilian construction worth trillions of dollars. Mike, if you know stories like this, share them in the comments below. This is just one of hundreds of incredible innovations that emerged from World War II, often from the most unexpected people in the most overlooked positions. Subscribe and turn on notifications to discover more forgotten stories of ordinary individuals who changed history forever. Just because in the end, history is not made by the men who command armies. It is made by the quiet men in workshops, the welders on scaffoldings, the engineers nobody notices, and the dreamers who refuse to accept that the impossible cannot be built. Homer Ferguson was one of them, and his ships, his methods, his stubborn refusal to surrender to expert opinion helped save a world. That is the true power of one ordinary man with an extraordinary idea.